Hey everybody, today we're here to talk about Age of Wonders 4, and in particular we are here to talk about the Materium Affinity Tomes. I've previously done the Order, Shadow, and Nature Tomes, and today it's time to talk about the Nature Affinity Tomes, time to do a discussion and tier list. But of course, as with my previous videos, I think the focus here is on the discussion part. As with my previous videos, and I have mentioned this a lot, I think that discussing the tomes and talking about when they're good, when they're bad, talking about all that stuff is generally going to give you a more clear perspective of the game. Just tiering the tomes isn't always the best, because Age of Wonders isn't the sort of game we should always just only pick the highest tier tomes. While that can give you a better idea as to which builds will overall be better, there's obviously some situations of going with one tome over another tome won't actually give you a better build because it doesn't synergize with everything. As I read through all my comments and I read through all of that, a lot of people do actually leave comments saying things like, oh man, I didn't realize that this tome did this thing, and now that I know it does that, I know of a different fun build I could do, or I know now why this tome is better, or I know why this tome doesn't really get picked that much, blah 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 blah. It can just generally give you a better perspective on the game to just kind of listen to everything and all that. And of course, as I have mentioned in the past, I think a lot of people just like longer videos and they kind of like discussions on this sort of stuff because it could just be useful to have discussion over topics you like to hear about, or just game discussions at all, because you know, some people do play a lot of games in their life and they do like discussing games because it's just their hobby, right? Like everyone likes their hobby. Bike people watch bike videos because they're about bikes, and video game people like that. So I think it's kind of as a nerd podcast, and I know a lot of people don't really like the introductions this way. A lot of people skip past this. Shame on you for skipping my ADHD rants. But as always, you know, the way I think about it is you people will probably use this as some sort of background noise while, you know, you're looking on your phone, or you use it maybe just as you're sleeping or something like that. If you do that, if you ever use my videos to sleep to, leave a comment saying that, because originally when I started doing longer videos, me myself, if I'm ever going to sleep, I put on a video on a topic I like, because, or maybe a topic I do like. I mean, I watch like D&D videos of people discussing D&D rules, even though I never play D&D, just because, you know, it's weirdly interesting to me to hear people talk about that stuff. So if you don't even play Age of Wonders 4, leave a comment on that too. You know, tell me if I've managed to make this interesting enough for people that don't even play Age of Wonders 4. But as always, it is my job as a YouTuber to say, make sure to like, make sure to comment, and importantly, make sure to subscribe. This helps you guys. I think someone made a joke in the comments, the call to action. I don't know if he was doing like a Mr. Beast joke, but yeah, I mean, that's generally what this is. It works, and because it works, I have to say it. Otherwise, you know, you fall behind everyone else who does it, and if I don't do it, then I don't do it, which, you know, obviously. Why is the Materium Affinity Tome then taking me a lot of time to go over? Because I did Order Affinity, which I play a lot. I did Nature Affinity, which I play a lot. And then, of course, I did a Shadow Affinity, which I play a lot. That leaves Chaos, Materium, and Astral, which I don't do a lot. In addition to that, I'd actually done a take of this video before. And as you guys might suspect, I do all these takes. I do all these videos in one take. I do a lot of practice, and I do a lot of, you know, preparation for it, but at the end of the day, I do it in one take. And in my previous take, I noticed that my microphone was too loud, and it was way too easy to hear if I ever breathed, or if I were like anything like that. Like it was way too easy to hear that, and it was just kind of really irritating my ears to listen to, so I had to just get rid of it, and here we are doing it again. So if I'm rushing through the early game tomes, it's because I've done them a few times now, so oops. Okay, so let's go into Materium Affinity. Why do I not like Materium Affinity? Let's discuss that first. Why don't I like it? Okay, so as I go through this, if you guys ever watch my streams of this game, you'll notice probably three different things, right? Number one, I probably get way too salty about a game that's really not that balanced to begin with. Number two, I really never go Materium affinity. And number 3, I often talk about how I wish the developers had put more focus into Materium affinity tomes and actually fleshed out their builds. I do like to complain about that, and I don't think that that's just me blindly complaining just to complain. Think about that from the perspective that I want the game to be a little bit better, and it's kind of me in my own way being like, I really wish this was better, so here's me complaining about it, saying like, hey developers, could you just do this, could you flesh out this a little bit better? So just be mentally prepared for it. Some people don't react well to me complaining, and maybe that's just me. You know, sometimes you get 50 positive comments and then you get 1 negative comment, and the 1 negative comment feels more impactful than the 50 positive comments, so whatever. So let's start going through all the Materium affinity tomes. First up and foremost, we have Tome of Alchemy. So I did talk about Tome of Alchemy in my other video, and my opinion on it is pretty much the same. I think it is an overrated tome, but the reason I think it's overrated is some people think that it's this S+ must-go automatic best tome in the game, and I think it's merely a really, really good tome that fits into most builds. So I'm not saying it's weak. I'm not even saying it's balanced. I'm saying it's very powerful. I just don't think it's auto pick in most situations. Now, why do a lot of people then complain about Tome of Alchemy being so good? So we need to explain the fundamentals of the game. So of course we have the building, which is probably the biggest reason this tome is so good. Here we have a tome that gives you a research post. Research posts are outrageously good. Why are research posts outrageously good? Because every province improvement, quarry, forest, or farm, all of them give you 5 resources. Not all resources are built the same. 5 food is just not as good as 5 knowledge. That's just how the game works. Because some people don't really mentally think about this. If they doubled the amount of food needed to get a population in a city, 5 food would still be worth 5 food, but 5 food would now be worth half as much as it used to be. Would that 5 still be 5? Just because both numbers are 5 doesn't mean they're equal. 5 knowledge is just blatantly better than anything else in the game. So research posts are just the best building. In addition to that, this is giving you 10 knowledge, just flatline, which is pretty good on its own. But then its other effect here is 3 knowledge per adjacent unique province improvement. That means a mine, that means a farm, that means a conduit, that means another research post, that even means a special province improvement counts to this. It's highly unlikely you get less than 3, and it's way more likely you can hit as many as 5 without really even trying that hard. I'll be lenient and I'll say this gives you probably on average, of course it wouldn't be a video of mine without me being really annoying by knocking over the mic. I hope that doesn't blow out you guys' ears too hard. I'll say on average this gives you, like, let's say at least on average like probably like 20 knowledge, right? So that's a lot of knowledge to get. Now, getting a research post at all as a special province improvement is quite powerful because there are buildings that need you to have at least 1 research post. And I'm saying this before I go into the rest of the video because it's always worth discussing this. A lot of times you can get a research post, but a lot of times you can't get a research post. Be it your mana that you could put the research post on is too far from your city and you need to upgrade too much and we get it too later in the game and you really want to get those unique knowledge buildings now, or you just don't have one at all. I've actually gotten totally randomly crapped on and just not had knowledge posts for my main city. But even in the ideal, or I should say normal situation where you get 2 research posts in your city, 1 mana and 1 special resource that you can put a research post on. So most cities will get 2 research posts in the city. Now, once you get a guild will hyper buff 1 type of province improvement. So the Farmers Guild will make each farm generate 10 more food. The Researchers Guild makes each research post generate 10 more knowledge. As we mentioned, 10 knowledge is just better than 10 of any other resource. They didn't really balance this, unfortunately. So this means research posts are just better. On average, you can get 2 for 20 knowledge from the Scholars Guild, but once you have things like Alchemist Lab, that's 3 for 30 from the Scholars Guild, plus all the knowledge from the Alchemist Lab. I said all that just to describe why the Alchemist Lab is so good, because some people really don't process just how good this is. So now let's talk about the rest of it. I have talked about this tome before, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. Mostly I'm going to give you my updated opinion. Disperse Afflicting Miasma is still pretty crap. Not really even worth discussing. Mysterious Tonic, here's the problem. I do not think support units are that good in the late game other than a few. I think there's 2 support units that in particular are good enough to be in the late game. The biggest problem is support units don't scale that much. They do start getting free actions off some enchantments and stuff like that, but a lot of these enchantments are short range, be it 1 range, which just means that they often just can't use them properly as the battles start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they could probably balance that by making these enchantments longer ranged. If they simply just made them 3 range instead of adjacent, this would help support units scale a lot better, but right now they're not. So what are the 2 supports at scale? Of course, you have Mystic when you go Mystic Summoner, because Mystic Summoning gets Mystic Summoner, a tier 3 racial support unit. Most support units only sit down here at tier 2. As you can see here, the difference between a tier 2 and a tier 3 support unit is a good 20 HP, which can be, well, that's a lot. And so just simply being a higher tier can often just make you straight better. So the Mystic Summoner does scale, and the second one that scales is, of course, the Vowkeeper. Now, we're not talking about Oathsworn. Oathsworn is way better than I said in my culture video, but I did also say it was kind of a newer culture that I didn't really have an opinion on yet. At any rate, the problem with these support buffs is that they're quite good in the early game and even into the mid game, but in the late game, you're probably going to have 2 supports in your army. Probably just to have some sort of cleanse or desperation heal or something, and a lot of people won't even take support units at all. So Mysterious Tonic, in my opinion, is less valuable than I thought in the past. It is still decent though, but it does of course have some weaknesses. It gives 2 random positive status effects. This is a free action, which is very good because free is free. This means you just get it every 3 turns for free. But at range 1, this means early in the game, you're very easily going to be able to get into position and do what you want. Later in the game, as you start having 18 units throughout a battlefield, it's going to be very hard for support units to get where they want. Hence why I'm saying developers should look into making these free support abilities range 3 so that they're just more usable. Now this doesn't heal like a lot of the other support abilities do. It just gives 2 random positive status effects and purges 1 negative debuff. Now this is good. This is good. I should use the term cleanse for removing a friendly debuff, dispel for generally doing both, and purge for removing an enemy buff. I don't know, this terminology is complicated, isn't it? At any rate, removing 1 random status effect from an ally is quite good in the early game, but as the game moves on and you start having more and more and more status effects, early in the game, archers might slow you. Later in the game, archers might slow you, poison you, sunder your defenses, put decaying on you, reduce your resistances, try to seduce your girlfriend. You know what I mean? It's going to be hard to stop all these things from happening with 1 negative status effect being removed. So Distribute Tonic starts the game pretty decently as the game moves on. Yeah. Afflictors, here's the problem with Afflictors, and I'm going to mention this a lot. Afflictors have a problem where tier 2 units just don't, they're like the worst unit type in the game. Tier 1 units, as you can see here, these ranks. Tier 1 units generally recruit at a higher rank and take a lot less draft to recruit. Tier 1 units are definitely worse than tier 2 units, but tier 1 units, due to recruiting at a higher rank, will close that gap pretty quickly. And a lot of tier 1 units could hypothetically actually recruit just as good as a tier 2 unit. Tier 2 units cost a lot more draft than tier 1. So the problem with tier 1 units can recruit at higher rank, making them immediately recruitable early in the game. They're the only units you can recruit. As you start getting out of the early game, they're the units you want to mass recruit if you want to get to 18 units to attack an enemy, or if you need to get to 18 units to quick defend yourself. As we start getting later in the game, you want tier 3 units to start filling out your army, or tier 4. Basically, tier 2 units don't fill a need. Afflictor definitely suffers from this, which is what we're going to get into right now. Afflictor is unfortunately a unit that no one really wants. It's a tier 2 archer. Archers are kind of the worst units in the game right now. Maybe battle mages are worse, but they're definitely not up there. It just has a mere 12 damage. It has a single shot, which is pretty decent, I'll admit. It's got average HP, average defenses, and it doesn't do anything else special. It doesn't even have an on-hit poison or anything like that. So Afflictor isn't really that amazing that I would want to build it as a tier 2 unit. I would probably rather just go with a tier 1 unit just for the cost efficiency. And then later in the game, I would either not want a ranged unit, or I would just want to move on to tier 3 units. That's kind of the problem with Afflictor. Okay. Material refinery. This goes with the alchemist lab. Most cities are going to have a magic material on them. This brings you to 10 knowledge, 10 gold on average per city. So material refinery is quite good. So at this point, the only two good things are alchemist lab, material refinery. And this is why I just don't think Tome of Alchemy is auto pick. And honestly, as my time with the game moves on, I do think Tome of Alchemy is really good and quite frustrating that it can allow you to get to super late game builds by combining the knowledge here and combining the knowledge here. Like, these two things are frustrating. The fact that someone can just take this tome, start generating giga knowledge, and just be really annoying because it can reach the highest tier units really fast, right? But as a tome that affects the early game, it kind of doesn't. Now, the two other things that are decent with this tome are fumigation. There are some issues with siege project researches. You're researching something that really isn't going to affect the game that much, whereas some of these things that you can research can be massively impactful. This one really isn't. 2 or 3 times a game, maybe fumigation really matters, but it is really good at what it does. This allows you to clear out your early game city state really easily, because at the start of combat, once you pay for a siege project, at the start of combat, all units defending the city take 16 blight damage and get 2 poison. That 2 poison is going to do 8 damage a round for 24 damage. So in total, the defenders are going to take 40 damage off fumigation. That's a lot of damage. So this is definitely something that can make sieges very, very easier at a tier 1 tome. And that's something I should mention. This is a tier 1 tome, so a lot of these effects shouldn't be scaling that amazing. Yeah. Anti-magic tincture. Now, this is the third really good thing from this tome. This is why it's generally just a good tome, though. This is an AoE complete cleanse for allies and 2 status protection. Now, it's not too expensive either in combat casting points or mana. Now, remember, combat casting, you are limited as to how much you can use in combat, but mana is how much mana you have to actually use the spells. So it's not really using that much mana at all, and it's not using that much combat casting. Having a dispel at all, a complete cleanse for your army, is really good. There are a lot of situations where you get dominated that you just need to get your dude out of mind control. There's some situations where you get stunned or frozen, where it can be quite good to get out of that situation. Then there's sometimes you just might run into a situation where you just get so debuffed that removing all these debuffs will help your characters be relevant. Then it gives you 2 status protection, helping you not be debuffed again. So this is a really good tool to have in your back pocket. So the Giga Knowledge combined with even more knowledge makes this tome good on its own. Everything else it does is okay. The Mysterious Tonic is okay. The Anti-Magic Tincture is good. Fumigation is fine. This you might not even cast ever, even if you get it. Afflictor is buildable. Let's move on. Tome of Enchantment. So last time I talked about Tome of Enchantment, in the video I had to purge because my voice was definitely a bit too loud because I turned my mic up too much. The biggest issue I ran into with Tome of Enchantment, and I wanna compare this more directly. Tome of Enchantment compares directly to another tier 1 tome, Tome of Zeal, and in a lot of ways, Tome of Enchantment comes out short. Now, Tome of Enchantment's a very good tome, but has the issue that a lot of Materium tomes have. They're trying to do what other tomes are doing, and they're just kind of doing it worse than what you could get from a different affinity. Now let's look at Tome of Enchantment, and I'll compare it to Tome of Zeal in a second, and I'm just going to generally go over Tome of Enchantment. We've got a good buff for draft, which is a rare resource. Unfortunately, draft doesn't really affect you that much early game. That's 15 draft and some mana per adjacent quarries. You're not really going to build this in the early game, but it's good to have in your back pocket. Cities can cap out around 90 draft, 90 to 100, and having an extra 15 is good. You've got Summer Copper Golem. Now this unit is of course quite good as well. Copper Golem has 65 HP, 3-1 defenses, so it's pretty tanky. Reinforced, so it's hard to shoot down. Heartless, so it doesn't get moraled. It's got the typical polearm stats. As a summon, this is a pretty good tanky, burly summon. Copper Golem, don't get me wrong, there's no issues with it. It's quite a good summon. I just clicked the wrong thing again. I would say Copper Golem's quite a good summon. I don't have any issues with it. Spell Tempered Shields has an issue that I'm going to need to discuss. Spell Tempered Shields in the past, I would say, was a really, really, really good enchantment. These days, it's losing a lot of value. Why is that? Well, the problem is the developers have kind of let the cats get out of the bag with the tier 4 racial units. In the past, the only tier 4 racial units, realistically, the only really good one was the Warbreed. But now you got the Warbreed, and now you got the Spellbringer, and now you get the Pyre Templar. And even some people are building for the Calamity Demon is not a racial unit, but it's still a tier 4 caster. I got the actual name, the Accursed Trickster. So we've got a racial unit for pikes, we've got a racial unit for chargers, we've got a racial unit for the skirmishers. Sorry, my mind just blanked there for a second. So having no ability to get a tier 4 racial shield unit, yes, I know there is one in the game. It's pretty bad, and it's found in a bad tome, so a lot of people just don't even bother with it. But the problem is, as time goes on in a game, shield units will slowly lose their value. A lot more enemies are going to start doing magic damage, although this does give resistance. That does mean that the advantage of a shield unit, having that extra armor front-facing enemies, that advantage will start going away and be less and less relevant. And then, of course, tier 4 units are just, they're tier 4. Tier 3 units can be buffed a lot, and they can get veterancy easier, but tier 3 units are tier 3. Tier 4 units are tier 4. They're just going to have more stats because they're higher tier. Once you start needing to win that 3v3 battle and win the game, tier 3 units are just going to have issues. So it does mean over the course of a game, Spell Tempered Shields will slowly fall off. Early in the game, very good. Mid game, very good. Late game, you might stop having any units in your army that even have Spell Tempered Shields on them. So Tome of Enchantment went from Spell Tempered Shields being this amazing enchantment for the entire game to being something you might just stop even having in your army. That's not really good. Purging Arrows is okay, but we're going to start running into one of the issues I have with Tome of Enchantment. Purging Arrows affects ranges and skirmishers, Spell Tempered Shields affects shields, and Sundering Blades affects melee. To affect their whole army reasonably, we need 3 different enchantments. That's 3 different knowledge researches. So is Purging Arrows good? It's okay. It's better or worse depending on what you fight. It's obviously kind of a counter pick option here. Your ranged units and your skirmishers, but not battle mages, but not support units, who could definitely benefit from being affected by this. I definitely think if Purging Arrows was renamed to Purging Ballistics and included mages, I definitely think that would make this tome better and make this thing better. But for now, it's only ranged units get 10% bonus damage against magic origin and get a 60% chance of purging an enemy buff. It's decent. I'm not going to call it bad. Unfortunately, magic origin units, as more and more people start having racial units, like again, Stormbringers and Pyre Templars being added into the game, less and less people rely on mythic units. There are some builds that do need those magic origins, that do need those mythic units for sure. There's still undead, there's still umbral mistresses. That 10% damage against them is still useful, but that 10% damage is not nearly as much as you're thinking. It's only 10%. Then the purge effect can be good, but often if you're trying to shoot a unit, you want to kill it. So purging off buffs is, I'm not saying this is bad by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that the tome is mostly about buffing melee, and then we have a mediocre buff for range. So one of the problems here is getting all three of these is not the greatest thing. But I mean, I'm not saying purging arrows is bad. So then we have Sundering Blades, which I'm going to go to real quick instead of Awakened Tools. Now this allows all your melee units to sunder enemies' defense. And then that gets them Demolishers so they can destroy obstacles. Now Sunder Defense will remove Bolstered Defense. Shocking, I know. And then Sunder Defense, well, let me compare. Bolstered Defense gives 1 resist. Sunder Defense gives -1 resist and -1 status resist. That does mean that yes, Sundering Blades makes it easier for enemies to continue to be debuffed. However, once again, we're running into another issue here. As the game moves on, we become more and more about one-shotting enemies. We become more and more about doing enough damage to kill enemies. We become less and less about sitting there whacking away at each other. While Sundering Blades can be useful for eventually removing bolstered defense and killing people, the reality is it's better to build for, realistically, I think the way you should do it, 2 to 3 units should be killing an enemy unit, depending on how tanky they are. If they're giga tanky, you're probably going to need more than that. But realistically, no more than 4 units should be used to kill an enemy unless they're going really tanky. Sundering Blades as status resist and as all these things start getting higher and higher, it has an effect. And reducing enemy defense does give you a % damage increase, so it is decent. I've just found that Sundering Blades, it's really good in the early game, obviously. As the game goes on, it starts just being less and less impactful, particularly against some other enchantments. Now, of course, this brings us to our last thing, Awakened Tools. Awakened Tools gives you 20 production, 20 draft, for the cost of -10 city stability. Now, the only downside is the city stability can often knock you into unstable, which gives you a -10% total income, which can often mitigate the benefits that this spell does in its entirety. But it is pretty good. It gives you early game production, and of course it gives you that rare draft. A lot of people can realize that their builds don't have any draft, and Awakened Tools and Rune Carver's Camp are a way to give you draft. Now, what is the problem with Tome of Enchantment? Well, the problem with Tome of Enchantment is Tome of Zeal is directly competing against it. Sorry. Tome of Zeal is directly competing against it at the same job and doing it better. Now, what do I mean? Let's compare here for a second. We got the Copper Golem against the Summoned Zealot. Now, Summoned Zealot will often be tankier than the Copper Golem because he is a racial unit and he will get those racial defenses. Most people will give some defenses to their racial units. The Zealot will also out-damage the Copper Golem, so he does more damage, and he will often be just about as tanky anyway. And he's a racial unit, so he will continue to get small buffs. So if you summon down Zealots early in the game, they'll scale a little bit better. Copper Golems do evolve, but I mean, then you're paying for more. I mean, at the very least, we can say Summon Zealot is just as good as Copper Golem, at the very least. But here's where we get into issues. Circle of Zealotry is another quarry that gives you draft. Unfortunately, this one gives you draft per positive or negative level of alignment. By mid to late game, you should probably be full evil or full good. Even if you're not, it's 20 draft. If you're full evil, that should be, to my knowledge, 30 draft. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this will give 30 draft versus the 15 from the other one. And it will give city stability per adjacent province improvement. That's just free. You just get that. You can just take that home. No one can stop you. So Tome of Materium, Tome of Enchantment, is giving us mana, whereas I think stability will generally be more useful. So Rungar's Camp is just generally less useful than that one. So that brings us to Awakened Tools. The Zeal spell is 45 mana to buff a city for 3 turns. Awakened spells is 60 mana to buff a city for 3 turns. Awakened Tools gives drafts and production, but only 20 production. What is it called again? I always forget it every time. Fanatical Workforce gives you 60 production at the cost of 20 food. Now here's the problem. I think the upkeep is about 7 on the spell. The Materium spell will give 20 production, then 7, then 7, then 7 on its cost. So 60 plus 7, 7, 7 is 81. This will be 45, but drop off after 3 turns. But it'll give 180 production compared to the other ones, 60. But then you cast it again for 45. Here's the thing. This is then only cost a grand total of 90 mana, whereas the other one in Materium, I literally can't remember names right now, Awakened Tools, will then cost 21 again for 102 mana. So we're now 90 mana versus 102 mana. Awakened Tools only starts being cheaper after about 8 to 9 turns. And it only gives a third of the production. Now, however you want to debate it, the food versus the city stability, I think the food penalty is probably worse, particularly in the early game. But because you're just setting up your city so much easier, so much earlier, Fanatical Workforce will just generally, I think most people will think it's better than Awakened Tools until we start getting to that late game. So Tome of Enchantment's directly competing against another tome at generally the same things and not doing as good. This isn't a bad tome, and maybe comparing tome to tome is a bad idea, but they're kind of very similar, bizarrely similar. Now, the last thing is why I talked about 3 enchantments here. Why did I talk about that? Because we go into Tome of Zeal. Legion of Zeal affects all melee and ranged units and gives them spirit damage. Spirit damage, of course, is 2, doubled for non-repeating attacks, and then against condemned units will double again to 4 damage, 8 damage on non-repeating attacks. That means Legion of Zeal starts at 2 damage, and then once you get way more sources of condemn, will start being 4 damage way more often. Legion of Zeal affects more units at 1 enchantment with a better damage type, and will generally scale better throughout the game than any of these other tomes, than any of these other buffs here. So Tome Enchantment, it's like one of the better tomes in the game, and it's still just like, there's something, it's not, I don't know. Let's move on then to Tome of Discipline. Oh boy. So let's talk about Tome of Discipline here real quick. Conduits, I would say, arguably, conduits are weaker than farms. Now, farms provide boosts to your city. Certain buildings will be boosted by having a certain amount of buildings in them. So, for example, to have a mint be boosted, you will need 3 farms. Boosting them will reduce their gold cost and reduce their production cost so long as they are boosted. Conduits don't really boost anything good and aren't really needed. They give you mana. You don't really need that much mana. So the monastery is a conduit at the early game at tier 1 when you don't really want conduits. Now its effect is good. City stability and draft is good. Per adjacent farm isn't good. Farms aren't really needed, as I mentioned, so maybe you could get it next to 2 farms. That's 14 stability and 16 draft. When you phrase it like that, it's firmly underwhelming, especially because this forces me to have another conduit on my city, which I probably don't really want. Now, city stability can be okay, but there's a lot of sources of city stability throughout the game, and a lot of times you can actually accidentally clip them and go above 100 stability. It's not always going to happen, but it is something you have to kind of worry about. So I don't really think Monastery is blowing my mind, and it does nothing for me in the early game. Not really. I mean, you could maybe combine it with Awakened Tools, I guess. I don't know. Mantra of Purification. Well, I should say the Tome of Discipline as a whole, I think I didn't rate it that well. I have seen some people use it decently. I think it's an okay tome. I just don't... It has some issues, let's say that. Materium Purification heals 15 hit points on an ally for 5 mana, 10 casting points, so pretty cheap, pretty easy. This is mostly an early game cleanse. Now, why is this generally not as good, though, as Tome of Alchemy's? So, Tome of Alchemy's cleanse is an AoE, and it's a full cleanse, meaning throughout the entire game, it's a full cleanse of your ally. Materium Purification only hits 2 negative status effects. It's just not as good as a full cleanse. Later in the game, once we start stacking up every debuff, it's not going to dispel all of them. You might not even hit the one you want. So, for example, you could have 3 debuffs, one of them being a stun, and you want to get rid of that stun, and you might end up not actually cleansing the stun on RNG. If you guys ever watch my videos, you'll hear again and again, I'm going to say it again and again, I don't like randomness because I don't like being inconsistent. Nobody wants that. Especially when you get one single spell to cast an entire turn of combat, and you could potentially cast it on something that doesn't even help you. Monks are a tier 2 unit that I don't really want to go over them again, but I guess I'll go over them again lightly. They're a tier 2 unit that I don't think tier 2 units are really in high demand right now, not in this meta. And it's not really that amazing. I compared it to a bunch of other tier 2 units. It's not tankier, it's not squishier, it's slightly below average, not by any real big degree. Their damage is definitely lower than any other fighter. In fact, I think tier 2 fighters are typically around 14 damage. This one's 10 damage. Now, its big deal is if it does a triple attack, the third attack in a turn does 12 spirit damage to the target and all adjacent enemies, which is pretty good. The problem with this is only if they triple attack do they really start equalizing to the damage that other units get. That's not really good. You don't really want a unit that needs to triple attack to be useful. But that does, of course, bring you to Leap. Leap is an ability usable every 3 turns that is a free action, can relocate you to spaces. This allows you to jump over enemies and get good flanking hits into their backside, to reach the squishier range units, or just to leap and reposition to get a triple attack using all your ability points for that turn. So Leap does, of course, combo with Melee Strike for them to get the combo attack. I don't think Leap is terrible. I just don't think the Monk as a package, I clearly don't think that the combo is making up for everything else. So they got one more ability, Meditate. This is the same as the spell we saw earlier, heals 15 hit points, has 2 negative status effects to spells, and then you enter defense mode. Earlier, when I went over them in my order video, I said I was kind of underwhelmed by monks. Since that video, I've seen 0. No monk, ever. I've literally not seen anyone even try to build monk. So there's obviously something wrong with this unit. It's clearly not good enough. And that's all I can really say. It's just not good enough. Even the people who do go Tome of Discipline are mostly looking at it for Inner Mastery. What is Inner Mastery? Your entire race gets 20% more healing received in combat and +1 status resist. This is pretty good and probably the best part about this tome. It's just a really good tome. I shouldn't say tome. It's just a really good race transformation. There's nothing wrong with it. It's pretty good. It's just good. There's nothing bad about it. Okay. Focus Aim has increasingly become ignored to the point where, once again, I have literally never seen it since making that order video. Here's the problem with Focus Aim. As time goes on, it becomes more and more clear that building your range units to actually do damage is preferable to building them to hit once per entire combat decently. Focus Aim is an ability that you get True Strike once per battle for free. Now, this does allow you to Alpha Strike pretty decently. The problem is, range units aren't like damage monsters baseline. This tome doesn't actually help them do damage at all. So hitting all 3 attacks of just your base damage isn't really going to do that much. And because it's only usable once per battle, it's only good in a big Alpha Strike play. That's really no good. Now it does affect range units, battle mage units, and support units, but it weirdly doesn't affect skirmishers, which is odd, because not every skirmisher has automatic hit on their ranged attack. So this was a bit of an odd choice to not give it to skirmishers. In addition to that, just the once per battle is a huge downside. I think if focus aim was changed to once every, like maybe cooldown 3, so you can maybe use it a second time in a battle, it would be better. But the biggest issue of focus aim just seems to be no one really wants all 3 of their unbuffed range unit attacks to hit, because it really doesn't do much. That brings us to empowered strikes, the second reason to use this tome. If you do 3 attacks in a turn, you do a stun on a 60% chance. Now you do +1 physical damage, but here's the problem with empowered strikes, and this is kind of a recurring problem with Materium tomes. It only affects polearm, shield, fighter, and skirmisher, not shock units. So this doesn't even affect all melee units. In fact, we can see here, Sundering Blade does affect shock units. Tome of Discipline doesn't. Now, a shock unit couldn't triple attack anyway, so it's not really the biggest deal. But even if all shock units got was +1 damage, doubled for being a non-repeating attack, it would at least help you should you go a shock unit. But once again, we have another tome that's, in my opinion, extremely specific with what you need to do for it. And maybe the devs should be focusing on not making just generally overarching good tomes in every situation. Cough prosperity, cough calamity from the same expansion. But Tome of Discipline is definitely not that wonderful, and really more usable only when it needs to be used. This brings us to Tome of Rock. Why is it called Tome of Rock? Because it's a dud. Because it doesn't really do much. Tome of Rock has a central quarry. You might recognize Central Quarry. It's a quarry with 15 production and 5 more production per each adjacent quarry. Why then might you recognize Central Quarry? Because Central Quarry is the same as, where is it? Ah, wait, here we go. Central Quarry is the same thing as the builder's quarters that you get from Industrious. The generic building that you get from Industrious is the same, literally the same building as Central Quarry, which is odd to me that they literally couldn't think of anything else to do. Overall, it's okay. It's just like, it's the same building. Gargoyle is an interesting unit, but not a good unit. Now, this does not say summon Gargoyle, this just says Gargoyle. Unfortunately, we have the third tier 2 unit. Tier 2 being the worst tier in the game, unfortunately, just because of how the game plays out. We have the third tier 2 unit. Now, does Gargoyle count as a construct? No, they count as an elemental. So it's an elemental unit, 73-1 stats. So even for a tier 2 unit, its stats are pretty bleh. They're fine, whatever. But it's not a racial unit, so it's actually going to be squishier than any other tier 2 racial unit. Its charge attack is just a generic 2/2 charge attack. Its only effect here that's any decent is Turn to Stone. Now this is an effect where every time you enter defense mode, instead you turn to stone, which gives you the Stone Skin modifier, raising your defense and resistance by 3 for -3 spirit resist. Why -3 spirit resist? I don't know. I guess spirit just really needs to be the best damage type in the game. That's it. Spirit just has to be the best. It just has to. And then you heal for 15. Other than that, to normal defense mode. So obviously, Gargoyle defense mode, healing him and giving him all those defenses makes him quite a tanky dude when he goes in defense mode. The problem, he only retaliates once anyway. And you can just I don't know, it's just off the top of my head, charge him with any unit and knock him, but okay. It's okay, I guess, maybe, I don't know. It's kind of it's not exactly a great unit, and yeah, this is gonna be a theme of Tome of Rock. Then we have Rock Blast. Now this is a tier 1 tome, so make of that what you will. Rock Blast is a single target hit. You do 24 physical damage, cancel a unit's defense mode, and cancel a unit's retaliation attack. This is a spell. I could definitely see this impacting the early game, I guess. If you need to get a damage spell in the early game, this is a decent one. It could definitely make a unit far tankier than an enemy imagined it would. It's okay, but it will not scale at all. As you reach the late game, using your 1 spell per turn will be completely wasted on Rock Blast, obviously. The problem is there's some tier 1 tomes with spells that do kind of scale and can be relevant, and there's some tomes with a spell that literally does not do anything. Okay. Stone Skin. Wow, another spell that it gives a unit Stone Skin for 3 turns. Once again, you have 3 resistance, but -3 spirit resist, because for some reason spirit needs to be the best damage in the game. And what does this do? This means that, of course, you're just way tankier. You make a single unit way tankier for 3 turns. Once again, not bad in the early game, but does not scale at all. Okay, now I move on to one of my favorite enchantments from Materium. I don't know how good it is, but I really, really like it conceptually. This gives all melee units and ranged units for 1, so it's an enchantment in Materium that affects a lot of units, +1 physical damage, and a 60% chance of applying bleed. This is actually interesting because it has advantages and drawbacks compared to other enchantments. Unfortunately, its drawbacks are probably more than its advantages. So let's just compare it for a second. We get +1 physical damage on all melee and range. Now, affecting range makes it good, right? Well, unfortunately, not really. Here's a problem. If we look at other enchantments for melee, we can see -2 physical, +2 magical. This will be on fire, lightning, poison, ice, frost, whatever you call it. Blight, I guess, instead of poison as well. And magic is just going to do more damage than physical. So losing 2 physical for 4 magical is just way better. All these enchantments like this for magical damage. And then you get a scaling modifier. Instead of applying bleeding, which, sure, it bleeds, I guess. As the game goes on, even if you get an enemy to 5 bleeding, losing 20 health a turn is really not going to be that impactful. But this ability, all these sorts of abilities, and there's 4 different versions of them in 4 different tomes. They will always deal more damage against enemies that have the debuff on them that makes you deal more damage. So they scale way better and are better in the early game. The only time obsidian weapons is good is right in the early game, or if you're doing a hybrid range plus melee build. The thing is, most people build only for range or only for melee, and most people don't want to build only for early game fights. Obsidian weaponry also doesn't do magic damage, it does physical damage. Honestly, obsidian weapons could probably just be changed to 2 physical damage, and it would be fine. Because at the very least, it would be good early game and then not be as good late game as these other enchantments, but at least it would have a niche of being good in the early game. Now, it's not even as good early game as these other enchantments, and significantly weaker in the late game. Overall, real questionable decision there. Earthkin is interesting. It's a tier 1 race transformation that gives your entire race +1 defense, mountain camouflage, and mountain walk. This allows you to be invisible in mountains and allows you to traverse all mountain terrain much faster. It's not bad to just get +1 defense for the entire rest of the game. but the mountain stuff is significantly less useful than you think, because it's not like you can settle in mountains. It just means your race can move across mountains. You can move across mountains much easier than other races, so maybe this is Hannibal's greatest strength right here, but unless you're trying to attack the Romans in the back that they haven't guarded very well, you know, 90% of the times, even if you ambush a city, you go, aha, and you run up and you lay siege to it. And much like Hannibal couldn't siege Rome, if you can't fight their armies, it doesn't really matter if you sneak attack their city. You're still gonna have to actually siege the city and get through there. I'm not saying Earthkin is bad, I'm just saying it's significantly overvalued in a tome that really needs a winner. This tome needs one winner, and it just doesn't have any winners. In fact, to be honest, I think I even rated Tome of Rock too highly, and I did not even rate it highly. So, Tome of Rock so far, loser. So this gets us to our last summon. Summon Lesser Stone Spirit. Is this one good? Yeah, actually, I think Stone Spirit is pretty much the only big winner of this one. But okay, that's annoying. I think he's pretty much the only winner of that one, and even then, I don't think it's that big a win. So this is actually technically a shield unit. So it has 2-1 defenses and then 5 defense from the front. 65 HP is pretty good for an early game summon. Average damage, no special abilities. I think that's it. So it's a mountain walking unit, which really is not that relevant, truth be told. I guess it is an evolving unit. It can eventually evolve into a stone spirit, a full-blown stone spirit. It is tanky. It is a summon. You can just summon it in. It generally won't get killed. It's pretty much the best thing a Tome of Rock, and I would say a good summon is good, but it certainly doesn't make a tome. Especially a tome that's gonna fill your, because do remember, once again, I do like to remind you guys, this is a civilization-esque game. You're just building your own tech tree. And when you're filling your tech tree with all these random options, because you always get presented 3 options, when you're filling it with all these options that are absolutely miserably terrible to choose, no one's gonna want to get Rock Blast mid-game. No one's gonna want to get Gargoyle mid-game. And when you have all these options, and you suddenly roll Stone Skin, well, the tome just inted you. Okay. Tome of Rock is just, yeah. Tome of Artificing. Is this one the good one? Is this one the great one? Well, no, not really. So here's the problem with Tome of Artificing. It is good, actually. I don't know why I said it wasn't good. It's just not like S. But yeah, no, I would say Tome of Artificing is decent enough. It does synergize with a lot of different builds. Artisan Armament, obviously, is really good for barbarians. Yeah. The only problem I think with Artisan Armaments is 30% crit chance doesn't really outscale other unit enchantments until later in the game. I think later in the game, as you start getting higher and higher tier units with more base damage, Artisan improvements can start outscaling the other melee damage enchantments. But for now, it doesn't in the early game. Later in the game, it can, though. It's certainly very good on barbarians, though. The other problem is it doesn't affect ranged units for some reason, even though it has literally nothing to do with melee, either in its description or anything. It could very easily affect range units. In fact, it could affect range units, it could affect all units. Would that make it overpowered? Maybe. But to be honest, I think battle mages and support units and range units kind of suffer from not really getting that many enchantments as is, and a lot of the better enchantments not affecting them. I'm going to keep mentioning it because it's kind of a recurring problem here. And either way, Artisan Armaments is like fine. The later in the game you go, the better it gets. At about tier 3, I would say it starts outperforming enchantments from the other tomes, probably about tier 3. And also, if you already have damage enchantments, then it's just doing really, really good. Why is that? Critical hit chance. Critical hits cause 50% more damage. Now, do remember that critical hits, well, that means only 150%. A lot of people see critical hit, they think 200%. A lot of video games these days are reducing the amount of damage that crits deal because, as I've said for about 20 years now, crits being 200% is A, way too random, and B, way too much damage. So most games these days are actually making crits about 150% to 125%, or I've seen some games only make crits like 110%. That one's probably too low. That one's maybe going a bit too far. But yeah. So realistically, it's 15% more damage. That's why I would say once you're starting to reach that like 15, 16, it's better. So Artisan Armaments is the best thing here. Does the rest of this tree do good? Well, let's look at its building. Its building is a unique mine that gives you 10 gold and 5 production per adjacent quarry. This one's actually not too bad. It's not too hard to hit 2 adjacent quarries. Mines aren't terrible either. Gold isn't bad. 10 more gold. It's certainly not bad either. So I would say if you've used it decently, that'll be about 10 gold, 10 production. That's certainly not bad. It does require a bit more setup than the really good buildings, but it's not a bad building. I would put this as like above. I put this as, it's at least average strength in economy. Its other unique effect is spawn an iron golem for the owner's side for combat in this domain. That gives you an iron golem, another iron golem, which is good because people like more units, action economy and all that. So it makes your city much harder to attack because any battle in your domain, you have an extra iron golem. Now, this does say iron golem, not iron golem assistant. That'd be the weaker version. I think it might still be spawning the assistant. I haven't checked personally. I think since it says iron golem, it should be summoning the tier 3 iron golem. At least I hope it does now. So this should actually be about average for the economy and then slightly above average because it makes your city just a little bit more defendable. Talking about defendable, Artisan Fortification. This is a building that you can put into your city that gives you 20 fortification health and bolt repeater towers. Bolt repeater towers are just ballista towers, but better. So of course you get a city with better defenses, which is okay. I mean, okay, I'm trying to like show bolt repeaters and it's being dumb. Bolt repeaters are mere 10 damage. That gets reduced by defense. Often these just won't really actually contribute that much damage throughout a fight. Maybe throughout a fight they'll contribute to like half a unit's health bar. Realistically, it's not that big a deal. You're building it for the fortification health, and even then fortification health is not really that big a deal either, because unless you're like on a multi-front war and you just need a city to be really annoying and be able to be sieged for like 5, 6, 7 turns before being broken through, fortification health is just not really that big a deal. Overall, it's an okay building, I guess, but it's not really helping you. I think if they made it a little bit more impactful, this tome could go from like a pretty good tome to like a great tome. But right now you're basically looking at Artisan Armaments, and that's like it. Which is why a lot of people kind of skip over Artificing. But then took its Siege Magic. Now this affects only battles, only support units, and only battle mages. So once again, another tome that needs a lot of enchantments to affect your army, which is why most people just only stack melee. But so it gives all support units and all battle mages a 10% flat damage, which is good. That's a good multiplier. Siege Breaker, applying more fortification damage during a siege, letting you siege quicker, break through enemy defenses quicker. So if an enemy did neglect to build more fortifications, you could potentially break through in 1 turn, which is, you know, kind of good sometimes. And then it gives you Demolisher, so you can demolish stuff. Overall, pretty crap, actually. Pretty outright crap. 10% damage is just not enough for supports and battle mages to be relevant. If it was like 15% or even 20%, maybe. But like 10% is an enchantment. Artisan gives 15% to all melee. Siege magic gives 10% to 2 of the less useful units in the game. This buffs the best units 15%. This buffs the worst units 10%. The math do be speaking. So of course that brings us to the Iron Golem. The Iron Golem is the same issue that we'll see with a lot of Materium units. Most magic units have been totally power creeped by this point. I think in the past, before they buffed traits, before there were all these amazing race transformations and stuff like that, I think in the past Iron Golem was a lot better. But nowadays, when we compare Iron Golem to Bastion and a lot of other units, we see that Iron Golem's really not that great. The only reason to really use Iron Golem is if you're playing a faction that straight up just has no melee line at all. And that's pretty much only Reavers. And maybe Reavers can use Iron Golem, and that's it. Because I'm gonna be real with you, even some tier 1 shield units, once we start factoring in unit traits and race modifications, even like primal protectors can be about as good as an Iron Golem and scale better, simply because they'll be tier 1, but they'll get all the veterancy traits from being tier 1 and recruiting at a higher veterancy, giving them all those good buffs, right? Then they're gonna have all the traits from being a racial unit. Then they're gonna have all the minor race transformations. Then they're eventually gonna get the major race transformation. So the Iron Golem has a real struggle of a time being useful. Now, that's not to say he's useless. He does get a defense mode that is really, 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 really good, because he gives all adjacent friendly units 3 more status resist. It's a normal defense mode shield wall, but his also gives allies status resist, which is generally considered useful and good. Now, it's a typical golem, so we get reinforced for more defense against physical range, but rarely do people big range, and a lot of times you just want your range units doing as much magic damage as you can, so physical damage is questionable. Now this does mean if you are shooting them from the front and you don't have magic damage on your rangers, you might as well just not even shoot them. Let's be fair. You just give up. Just go home. Like, there's no point. Just stop. Yeah. He's got Siege Breaker, so you can help siege cities quicker, which is decent. Overall, I would say the Iron Golem is frustrating, and this is what I was talking about earlier in the video. The Iron Golem is frustrating to me because he's like right on the verge of being a good unit. He's like almost there. He would just need a little bit of buffs, and I think he would be good and worth building for. But he's not quite there. The buffs aren't quite there. I'm gonna put this in card game terms for you. You know, Yu-Gi-Oh players, Magic the Gathering players. It's a deck. He's like an archetype that's like almost good, but because it slightly loses out to like every meta deck, there's no point in playing it ever, because you're gonna lose. It's almost there. Now it does mean to use single player players, Iron Golem's fine. You can totally use them and beat up on the AI, no problem. It just means that if you're trying to play air quote optimally, or if you're trying to play in multiplayer, Iron Golem, he's like almost there. He's good for like Reavers, and that's it. And he could be good for other factions if he had like, honestly, if they give him like 5 HP and a resistance, I think people would try him out. In all honesty, I think that's all it would take. He's like almost there. But unfortunately, that does mean that this entire tome is just here for artisan armaments. Because you do need 4 researches to get through a tome, you can't skip every research here. Eventually, you can't keep taking tomes that are only good for like one aspect of the tome. You do need to get tomes that are filled with good researches so that you can actually progress tome to tome without taking dud just to progress, just because you only wanted artisan armaments. Okay, this brings us to Tome of the Construct. Why do I call it the best tome? because it's the second best tome, actually, in my opinion. I think of all the Materium tomes, it's probably the second best. There's actually quite a few weirdly good Materium tomes. They're not all bad, but I would say this one's probably the second best one. Okay, why is that? It's synergy. It's not Tome of the Construct, it's Tome of the... Sorry. It's not Tome of the Construct, it's Tome of the Buffing Melee. You don't need to use constructs in Tome of the Construct. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend it. Don't use Tome of the Construct, use melee. Any melee will do. Now, we got Bronze Golem. I'm going to skip over him because he's got the exact issue of Iron Golem. He's like almost useful, but there's just no reason to it. Honestly, I think if they gave Bronze Golem like 10 HP and then, well, he's much worse. Iron Golem is almost useful. Bronze Golem isn't quite there. Bronze Golem, I mean, the problem is, like, once you start factoring in racial traits, he'll actually be squishier than average. He does have a good buff. Like, he does kind of make up for racial traits on his own. He's kind of designed with it. But the problem is he's tier 3, so he's not just fighting racial traits. He's fighting racial traits and transformations. And then he starts coming in behind. I would say Bronze Golem, he's frustrating too, because like he's right on the verge of being good. Like with a little bit of pushing, I think he would be better. Now, one problem, you guys might be noticing this, one problem is that both these constructs, Bronze Golem and Iron Golem, they're built from your city, not summoned. So these aren't tier 3 units that are almost good that you can summon into the field to fill out your army. These are tier 3 units that you need to recruit, and if I'm going to recruit units, why would I go for them? Okay. Let's move on to its building. Worker Construct Nexus. This is one of the strongest improvements in the entire game. It gives 10 production flat. Amazing. Then literally anything you put next to it, it gives more of it. It literally cannot go wrong. It is enormously powerful. I would argue it might actually be the best improvement in the game. Well, no, it's probably Tome of Alchemy. It's like the second best improvement in the game. Well, maybe Tome of Frostfire. Or sorry, Frostfire. I mean, it's like one of the best. It's at least top 5. It's really, really good because it requires no setup. You just you chuck it down in the middle of a field and you're good to go. Okay. Now let's talk about what the synergy with this tome is. This tome has a bizarrely high amount of synergy. First off, we have Linked Minds. It is a minor race transformation that whenever it's standing next to a construct or another unit with Linked Minds, it gets hyper awareness. This means it is now immune to flanking entirely, making these units pretty hard to do damage to. And again, if you're running a lot of melee, all your melee is now immune to flanking. So you can run them in anywhere and you won't just get randomly hit in the back by another melee unit, because so long as they're standing next to a buddy, they're immune to flanking. This is actually quite a good ability for not being squishy. A lot of times you will get flanked and take a lot of damage and you won't notice it. Compounding Defense enchants all your shields and polearms with defense and resist. Polearms, that means Pyre Templar. That doesn't mean Exemplar. That means Pyre Templar. Ooh, Tome of the Construct coming in hard. While this enchantment might not seem that much, it gives shields and polearms a defense and resistance when standing next to another one, which is okay. But the thing is, it affects polearms, which are currently top tier because of Pyre Templar, and the defense and resistance stacks with all other defense and resistance, making them really, really tanky, really hard to remove, actually. On polearms in particular, on Pyre Templars, this just makes those Pyre Templars such annoying units to get off the field. Now, of course, we have Cascading Command Reposition. This is outrageous. Any construct or unit with a linked mine, it is single target, gets hastened and strengthened. Then, if it's ever adjacent to another construct or adjacent mine unit, it hits again. If you put your entire army into a line before the battle, you hit it, and whoop, all 18 units in your army now have hastened and strengthened. Then, because this affects Materium and Order and counts as both of those, out of Order, you can make all your buff spells give Fortune for crit. Out of Materium, you can make all your spells give bolstered defense for more defense. So this turns from hastened and strengthened, which is already pretty good, into potentially hastened, strengthened, fortune for damage and crit, or hastened, strengthened, bolster defense for a lot of defense. Hastened, of course, makes you really, really fast and retaliate more, making you much harder to fight. Strengthened makes you do more damage. Cascading Command Reposition makes a melee army very capable of sprinting into range and massacring someone. Very powerful, that Cascading Command Reposition. The last thing here is Cascading Command Defend. So, of course, target friendly construct or lengthbound unit. It works the same way. You hit it down a line. This one's a little bit different because you can't use it at the start of the battle. Every unit you hit it on goes into defense mode. So let's say you have 5 units that have taken their turn and all attacked and they're adjacent to each other. You plop this spell down on them. Not only do they get all the buffs from it being a buff spell, but then they get Watchful, getting another retaliation attack. So if you've hastened them and then at the end of the next turn you use this on them, they could have 3 different retaliation attacks. Or if they're a Bastion, this will get them to 3 retaliation attacks by default. Or if they have a +1 retaliation attack from being in the high culture, this also brings them to 3 retaliation. Retaliation does cap at 3 though, so do be wary. You know, it doesn't stack to 4. Then they enter defense mode, which procs all their defensive mode buffs. Which, yes, is why it's so good with things like spell-tempered shields. And yes, that's why it's good on things like Iron Golems. And it was designed originally, I think, for Iron Golems. They just made it better to be spammed on Spearmen from High Culture and Pyre Templars. But there you go. Very solid tome here with a very solid building. No real downside. Very good synergy. Just, they call it Tome of the Construct, but they might as well call it Tome of the I'm Going Pyre Templar. I don't know why. Tome of the Shades, once again. I went over this previously in my Shadow Affinity video. I guess I'll have to do the same thing again. So, Tome of the Shades has the same issues. It's a good counter tome, I think. If you're doing melee against melee fights, it can be good at blinding people and ripping out all their retaliations so you can get good turns into them. Blinding. So, okay, let's go over the tome as a whole. No building, which sucks. Any building without a tome, or sorry, any tome without a building is going to have a weakness because it doesn't have a building. Buildings are free. Free stuff is good. I like free stuff. Shadow Blades means if any enemy is blinded, you ignore 50% of their defense and resist. So, if an enemy is blinded, you can do a lot of damage. Melee tend to be the tankiest, so doing a lot more damage to melee is generally considered to be a good thing. The Shade unit, I suppose I'll have to talk about it again. The Shade unit is weird that it's even in Materium to begin with, but it is a tier 3 racial unit with questionable usefulness. Its whole thing seems to be it has, okay, I went into this in my Shadow video, so let me try to rush through this for you guys who watched both of them, or maybe watched them both in a row or anything like that. I don't think there's any universe where Fatal Strike is better than a charging attack. It does up to 50% bonus damage, whereas a charge attack does up to 60% bonus damage. Unfortunately, an enemy that you're doing plus 50% damage to will be dead. You don't have to hit a dead enemy. They're dead. Unless they're a zombie, but then they would have health and then not be dead. They would be undead. So basically, in other words, Fatal Strike will literally never do as much damage as a charge attack. It'll typically, even if they're at half HP, you'll be getting I think it's about a 25% damage boost. So Fatal Strike is just straight up weaker than charge attacks. I don't think they really mathed that one out. Throw Shadow Dagger is a ranged attack that only has a 90% chance to hit and only has a 90% chance to blind. They could probably make it an automatic hit and go their weeb jutsus, because it's only doing 20 damage. It only has a chance to blind. it's firmly in the realm of being an okay attack, but I mean, it's only doing 20 damage. Like, no one's getting whittled away to death here. And it's not like this unit is great in melee to begin with. It's only other than decent ability. It is a skirmisher, so it gets the skirmisher effects of that. Its big thing, I guess, then is Shadowed Escape. When this unit's hit points drop below 30%, all enemies that are adjacent get blinded, and then it teleports 5 hexes in a random direction. Generally, I would call that useful, but sometimes the random direction can int you. But I would say generally, the majority of times, it's going to be useful for sure. Now, this unit is, of course, a good source of blind then, so then you can ignore 50% of their armor and magic resist. The downside is this unit's not really that good on its own. It is a racial unit, it is tier 3, so it does have some usefulness. It's missing a resistance. Most tier 3 melee will have 3 resistance. I think they were trying to stat it down because it's a skirmisher, but it's not really the best at being a skirmisher. If we go look at the Inquisitor gets the full 3 resistance because screw you. I guess he just looks way too cool to keep down. They just looked at how amazingly badass this dude looked and they said, well, he's gotta. Bolt of Judgment does way more damage. Sure, you can only use it every 3 turns, but how many times do you really need to use your ranged attack on skirmishers? Using it every turn is nice, but giga chunking an enemy and stunning them, and it always hits as well. I should mention that. I forgot the one thing that skirmishers normally do is they normally always hit. Well, not all of them, but most of the high tier ones do. So the Inquisitor comparatively is a way older unit that really doesn't even see that much use anyway. He's a very good tier 3 power spike unit for sure, but he already doesn't see that much use. And then when we compare him to the Shade, I would say arguably he's better than the Shade. So if they wanted the Shade to be useful, A, they'd have to raise that resistance to 3. B, their movement points being 40 is good. I did forget about that. C, I think Throw Shadow Dagger should probably have like 25 damage just to like compensate. Like I think it should be, as a skirmishing unit, I think its whole shtick should be sitting at mid-range and being an annoying piece of crap. So I think like 25 damage would be good for that. And then I think the last thing they should do, Fatal Strikes needs to go up, maybe like 26 damage, so that with a little bit more base damage than a normal charge attack, that'll help it a little bit. But even then, I mean, it would need to, okay, I've thought about this, it would need to actually be about 27, which would be an awkward number. 28 might be too much. It would be pushing it. 26 wouldn't be enough though. At the very least, if this was like 25 and this was 26, then it would, at the very least, it would be a primarily ranged unit with a weaker melee attack. At any rate, I think we spent enough time on the Shade. I just don't think it's really that good. I've mentioned this in the past. Okay. This brings us to Rending Shadows. Rending Shadows. Any enemy units in a 1 hex radius suffer 16 physical damage, have a 90% chance of being blinded, and having their defense sundered. It's okay. 1 hex radius is a bit restrictive. I think if it was a 2 hex radius with a like 100% chance of blinding and no sundered defense, that would be better. Maybe that would be overpowered for the purposes of you could combine it with Shadow Blades and massacre people, but at 1 hex it's like really restrictive. Remember guys, you get 1 spell cast an entire turn. We're up to tier 2 tomes here. Some of these spells should probably start actually scaling into the late game and being useful and doing something, right? We shouldn't have a spell that, once again, is useful mostly for just killing people. It's mostly just used for killing people that are just meleeing other units on the front line, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. So Living Shadows is kind of the self-synergy with the tome. Shadow Blades, Living Shadows, that's the synergy. Sorry, my nose is just... So, your race gets 10% evasion, which is far less useful than you think, because far less people use range than you think. Then, whenever you're attacked within 2 hexes, the attacker has a 60% chance to being blinded. So I guess the general idea here, if I had to say it, I think the developer intent is an enemy runs up, attacks you, gets blinded, and then on your turn, you run behind them with your assassin, you stab them in the back for big damage. That's, I guess, the hypothetical situation. The reality of the situation is typically the enemies run up to your shades, hit them with a charge attack, absolutely massacre them, maybe get blinded afterwards, but blind doesn't actually reduce your chance to be hit in melee. It just removes your retaliation attacks and removes your attack of opportunity. Here's the problem. Shades are already skirmishers. They already don't proc attacks of opportunity. So the shades kind of jank with this build, but yeah. This build, I've best seen it combining Shadow Blades with Living Shadows. Once again, I've seen it best used just doing that on a Pyre Templar build. I know, everything goes good with Pyre Templars. Don't blame me. The developers seem to be the ones who just make everything perfect with Pyre Templars and not good enough on its own. Tome of Winds has seen better days. Range is just not nearly as good as it used to be. It doesn't have a building, so I guess we can just go directly into the tome, right? So it's a tier 2 tome. Here we can see a tier 2 tome, and it has Summon Windrager. That's a tier 3 summon. Now, wait, no, it's a tier 2 summon. Oh, wait, never mind. I was totally wrong. Oh, because I thought of the wrong unit. Never mind. Wow, I've thought of the wrong unit this whole time. Never mind, it's a tier 2 tome summoning a tier 2 unit. This is... Oh boy, yeah, no, I remember. This unit is usable. I'll call it that. He's usable. We'll talk about him later. Seeker Arrows. Seeker Arrows gives all your ranged units and skirmishers +1 range. I guess it's called Seeker Arrows. Once again, I think they could make this affect battle mages and support units, and it would be fine, because... Wait a minute. So, here's the thing. Here's the thing, guys. The longer you shoot, the less your accuracy becomes. For each additional tile you're hitting, you get less accuracy, which includes this +1 range here. This has been a weird thing in the game since the very start. This +1 range is so significantly worse than anyone realizes. Its main use seems to be proccing that on skirmishers with auto hit abilities. Not even with ranged units, with skirmishers that auto hit their abilities at very long range. The Zephyr Archer, of course, is the unit from this tome that does kind of synergize with the tome, and this is kind of the tome's 1-2 combo. The Zephyr Archer gets a +1 range, which it can use Zephyr Shot, then it's 7 range. So it's an always hit ability for 3 actions, for a good chunk of 34 damage, with 50% damage dealt to adjacent enemies. Here's a problem. Zephyr Shot is not considered a base attack. Now, I just want to finish talking about Zephyr Archer here. She can't get on a mount. She's got normal stats for an archer. Overall, not an impressive unit other than the Zephyr Shot. But the Zephyr Shot is not considered. It's physical ranged, but not base. Why does that matter so much? Because when we look at most of the buffs, so if I look at Chaos Affinity, Fiery Arrows make base physical ranged attacks deal more damage. Well, wait a minute. If we look at Tome of Rock, make base melee and physical ranged attacks. Oh wait, let's go to one more just to be sure. Tome of Zeal gives you Zeal. Base attacks gain damage. Wait a minute, everybody. Yeah, that's right. Because Zephyr Shot doesn't count as a base attack, it's 34 damage and only gets affected by things like strengthened, some sort of % damage buff that you could give to the unit. That's about it. Zephyr Shot only does physical damage as well. If the enemy is any shielded units, it can't do anything. And even if the enemy has just brought a chunk of defense, it can't really do anything. It also doesn't scale worth a damn, so no one really cares. This combo has just been totally power creeped into the ground. Nothing more to say. Abducting Cyclone, I would actually say this is the best part of the tome now. Abducting Cyclone. Pull the closest enemy within 3 hexes to target empty hex. My upstairs neighbors are knocking. Not for me, obviously. They're knocking. I think they're setting up a painting or something. Can they hear me? Could you stop? Okay. Abducting Cyclone. So this pulls the closest enemy within 3 hexes to target empty hex. So if the enemy is put like an archer, I don't know why they'd be using one, or any unit. If they put any unit out of position, you quick yoink it 3 hexes, and then you try to gun it down. So the idea here with abducting Cyclone is you abduct a unit into your archer line, which is it's certainly an idea. And if you're trying to go for that strategy, it's good. I have not seen the best archer builds actually doing that strategy anymore, but I have seen it in the past. So abducting Cyclone pulls them, then has a chance to stun. I'm gonna say the stun is probably, ironically, in this situation, the least useful part, because the majority of the time after you pull them, you should instantly murder them and have them be dead and be unable to move. So abducting Cyclone's pretty good. Now this one is interesting because this is basically what I was talking about earlier. Maybe that's why they didn't want Tome of Shades to have that ability. But here we go. Dust Storm. Enemies in a 2 hex radius suffer physical damage and have a chance of becoming blinded. Personal opinion. Take this. Oh my god, dude, I don't know. I'm sorry for coughing so much. I think I'm getting a cold. Take Dust Storm, delete it from the game, and just change that into Rending Shadows. Then Tome of Shades is better because it can actually synergize better. And then Tome of Winds is better because it doesn't have this dud spell doing nothing. Favorable Winds as a spell, it's okay. I'm going to call it okay. Target friendly army regains all their movement points if they're on water, half if they're on land. You can only cast it once. It is 80 mana, 80 world combat casting. Later in the game, this starts becoming really difficult to fit in. Early in the game, this can be useful for clearing out the map, because you'll just have more movement. If it is a water-based map, you can annihilate the water and take like 10 battles in a turn. So it's not a bad spell from any stretch of the imagination, I don't think. It's just the later in the game you go, the less useful it becomes. It's certainly good though. In the right situation, I think this is certainly a good spell. If it came from a better tome, and I think if it came from a better tome, it would be considered really, really, really good. In this tome, maybe not so much. And then Summon Windrager. I'm not even going to talk about it. He's a disappointment. So the whole tome, disappointing. I rarely see it. I sometimes forget it's even in the game. It doesn't even feel like a Materium tome because it has like nothing to do with the rest of Materium. I honestly think it needs a complete remake from the ground up. It just doesn't even feel like a Materium tome. I don't even know what else to say. So now I've just shit talked all of Materium for an hour and a half now. Does it ever get better? No, is what anyone would say who doesn't know the best tome I'm about to talk about. Tome of the Transmutation. Okay. Why is this tome so good? Because it's insane. Because it's one of the best tomes in the entire game. This is seriously one of the most incredible tomes in all of Age of Wonders 4. Let's talk about how insane this tome is. 1. Transmutation Circle. Once built, can replicate the effects and income of a magic material. This is a mine that doubles as a magic material. It's really, 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 really good. If you didn't get a Tranquility Pool, you can ensure you get that Tranquility Pool, so you don't get RNG'd out of that negative 10% casting cost. B, if you didn't get any of the set bonuses for your materials, then you can guarantee that you get them. C, even if you did get the set bonuses for your materials, you can just make the set bonuses for any of the materials you missed, because you can build one in every city. So that's really good. Alternatively, you can just turn it into a tranquility pool because it replicates the effects and income, meaning 20 knowledge. That's pretty good. I know it's tier 3, and 20 knowledge from tier 3 isn't as good as, for example, the Frostspire, but the Frostspire can only be knowledge, and it's very good for that. Knowledge is quite good, but the Transmutation Circle can be anything. It can even be knowledge. It's seriously actually really good. It's so good. I went it a few times, and then every time I don't have it, I miss it. It's so good. Now, let's keep on a roll here before we talk about the bad thing of this tome. Let's talk about Transmute Resources. Why is this insane? Transmute Resources turns 75% of your mana into gold and production and food. But notice how I worded that there. 75% of your mana turns into gold and production and food. So if you lost 50 mana, you get 50 gold, 50 production, and 50 food. You know, all those sources of mana in the game that are pretty high because mana's not that useful. Well, now we can turn that mana into production and gold and food. But that production and gold and food will be so good because we can take these abundant mana sources. It's just really good. It's actually just so good, Transmute Resources. I have nothing else to say. Sometimes you can run into actual mana issues because you're burning so much of your mana, but put this on your throne city, on your capital, and oh my god, you can get the most powerful city in the game. You can get more food in your capital than nature builds who are actually going food. This is so good. Now, Melt Armor is a tier 3 spell that hits enemies in a 1 hex radius. I'm going to be real for you, I would read it, but that's an insult. 30 casting points to do a tiny bit of damage in Sundered Defense in a 1 hex radius. Whoopee. Sure, it's useful sometimes, but like, come on. It's a tier 3 tome. Give me tier 3 spells at least, man. I'm not saying it's bad, but whatever. Now, Adaptive Armor. Okay, this is really good too. All melee units get, whenever they take non-physical damage, which at this point will be from everything. Whenever they take non-physical damage, once per turn, they get bolstered resistance and status protection. Now, yes, that means that all your melee units, should they not die to the first attack, then get an additional resistance and +2 status resist for every attack after that. And if they don't die that turn, then it stacks on the next turn. Now, is this as good as the best enchantments in the game? No, but I would still say that this is pretty good up there. I would say this is pretty good up there, especially if you're a bit tankier and you can afford to absorb lots of wacky AoEs. Although, I'll be real with you, AoE damage is kind of fallen out of the meta because of things like Adaptive Armor, but we'll get to it. Now we got Steel Skin. Steel Skin can be a bit of a hit or a miss. Some people don't actually use it. It can be debatable. So you have got +2 defense, +2 blight resist, and -2 lightning resist. Now the +2 defense is good, because even later into the game, melee will be doing probably about half their damage in physical, or more, presuming that they're not a Pyre Templar. Why? Because Pyre Templars cheat and need to be nerfed. But presuming you're any other kind of melee, for the most part, you'll be doing about half your damage in physical. I think Exemplar is the other one that ignores this. Obviously, some of the mythic units as well. But what I'm trying to say is defense is still pretty good. The blight resist is hit or miss because it's not really that big a deal. Some builds have lots of blight, but there's no like blightning evocation. But there is lightning evocation. -2 lightning resist can really suck. Being slapped by Stormbringers is bad. Being slapped by lightning evocation is bad. +2 blight resist is okay if you're fighting the right people, but it's not like bone dragons are taking over the meta, whereas, yeah, Stormbringers are really good. So, Steel Skin, as the game has progressed, went from... It was something that was, like, kind of bad sometimes, and, like, could hurt you, but overall was good, to, like, debatably now, I might not even go it the majority of the time, just not to debuff myself against lightning. But we still got transmute resources, adaptive armor, transmutation circle. These three things are, like, on their own. This is kind of the thing with Materium. It always has such huge heavy hitters that carry the entire tome. Melt armor, I'll be real, it can be okay. It can be okay in the right situation, I'll admit. It's kind of disappointing to get to tier 3 and then you only have a 1 hex radius and it's not even doing 30 damage. So, oh well. This brings us to the Transmuter. What does the Transmuter do? The Transmuter is the best unit at the game at making you realize that you wasted all your resources building a Transmuter. There's one of the only tier 4 racial battle mages in the game. Now, after getting almost no enchantments throughout the game, after getting almost no buffs throughout the game, after synergizing with almost nothing throughout the game, the Transmuter makes up for it by also having absolutely laughably weak base damage. Wait, what? This counts as a tier 4 unit. So it does have Imperium upkeep, massive gold upkeep, etc. Its main two things here, in fact it's only two things, are shift bolts. Unleashes a magical bolt at target enemy. Unfortunately, it does pure physical damage. I don't know where the author got magical bolt here, because this is pure physical. There's absolutely no magic here at all. They're chucking rocks at people. I'm not even sure they're magical. I think it's just a dude with a rock who convinced people that chucking a rock is magical. The big thing here is shift armor. Enemies get sundered defense, and allies get bolstered defense. Which is okay, I guess. It's just kind of like, here we are tier 4, and we still give a shit about defense. Kind of weird. Now if we gave negative resist and positive resist, ooh, now that would be interesting. But we're kind of at this stage of the game where it's like, okay, who cares, right? Like, resistance is starting to get really important, and here we are, Materium tomes, still obsessed with defense. Now, its second spell is amazing. For building a tier 4 battle mage, we get a special AoE nuke whose damage is so big that they couldn't even list it. Well, actually, I'm just getting word that it doesn't even do damage at all. Oops. Yep, that's true. No, it just doesn't do any damage at all. My bad. So in fact, here we have Petrify. Now it does seem really strong on paper. Enemy units in a 1 hex radius have a base 90% chance of being stunned. And I will agree, on paper that is really good. The reality is, it is a cooldown of 3, so you can only use it once every 4 turns. The 90% chance of stunning enemies hits far less than you're hoping. You can't move before using it because you need all 3 actions. And here's the real problem. This is gonna sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. This unit is so goddamn bad. On any turn it's not using Petrify. It is so terrible that it's almost like you stunned your own army by having all these units in your army not doing anything. So she can spend her entire turn using Shift Bolt 3 times. Maybe she even hits all 3. It'll do absolutely no damage, do very little impact on the battlefield, and then a tier 4 charging unit will run up and smack her in the face for 50 damage. And she'll go, oh no, a real unit, damn it. No, I assure you, there's nothing else. This is it. This is all she does. Honestly, if she's gonna do pure physical damage, sure, fine, go for it. This needs to be at least 16. Maybe even 18 damage. And this needs to be like a 20 damage at least AoE. Because it'll be mitigated down to hell, but at least it'll do damage, right? At least it'll do a little bit of damage, something. Like, this unit is just so pathetic right now. It is so pathetic. I've never in my life had a unit more useless than this one, ever. Well, for a tier 4 unit. But otherwise, the Tome of Transmutation is absolutely insane, just because Transmutation, honestly, it's just Transmutation, Circle, and Transmute resources alone carry the entire tome. They're so good. Tome of Terramancy takes its roots from Tome of Rock and does nothing. What does it do? Well, nothing. So it's a tier 3 tome that summons a tier 3 unit, which is great. I mean, other tier 3 tomes are summoning tier 4 units that win the game, and this is summoning a tier 3 unit. Yay! How about this one summons anything else, and then Stone Spirit goes down to Tome of Winds? I don't know. So what does it do? Amazing building, right? Well, actually, yeah, kind of. This one's kind of hard to make fun of because it's actually kind of good. It's a conduit that gives 5 production, 5 mana, 4 mana per adjacent quarry, which is, these are okay, but then it gives you 5 world map casting points. World map casting points are really hard to find, really rare, really valuable, and this is one of the only sources of them in the game. So it's kind of hard to talk about because it's not that much, but you can never really get any of these, and it's a bit annoying because it's like, this building sucks, but you also really want world map casting points. So what are you gonna do, right? Let's look at the abilities. I'm sniffing. I think I am getting a cold. I got Keith's hair in my nose. I can't tell. So this is a tier 3 tome with an amazing spell that deals 25 physical damage to enemy units in a 1 hex radius and slows them, which is good. And then it deals double damage to obstacles, which is sure. But actually, this is really not that good, because the 25 physical damage will be mitigated down to hell by everyone. And then, I mean, the slow is good, I'll grant you that. But like, damn, that is not a big radius of a tier 3 spell, man. Crushing Earth, this is a damage spell. Target enemy unit, so 1 unit. I'm not even gonna read it. We're a tier 3 spell, and you think hitting a single enemy unit will ever be worth it. Okay. Unless it kills them outright for free, I don't want it. Okay, Earth Shatter. It blows up a mountain. That's what it does. I mean, all this other stuff, it's like cool, I guess. You can also use it to damage enemy armies for 20 physical with no debuff. Yeah, sure. It's whatever, who cares? Literally no one cares. Blowing up a mountain can be cool, I guess, because you blow up a mountain. That's cool. I mean, in a literal sense, it's cool. It's cool to do. I like blowing up mountains in games. It makes me feel powerful, okay? I feel powerful when I blow up a mountain. When people ask me, where did that mountain go? And I say, I blew it up. And they go, you blew up a mountain? And I say, yes, I blew up that mountain. That makes me feel powerful. That's about it, though. Tremor Ritual, a siege project. At the start of combat, towers, battlements, and additional wall obstacles are destroyed and 6 fortification damage. I'd make fun of it, but it's actually kind of good. Like, no offense to Tome of Terramancy, but the siege project is actually like the best thing you've got. Okay, Tome of the Dreadnought, a newer one. It's a DLC-ish tome. Actually, I think it's from the first DLC. Anyway, it's a bit interesting because it's a hit or miss. Basically, there's some things in this tome that are just so bad, and there's some things in this tome that are actually so good. So what in Tome of the Dreadnought is so bad and what is so good? Okay, War Foundry. Ironically, actually really good. Why? Gives you 20 draft. Gives you +5 draft per adjacent quarry or mine. That's a lot of draft, but that's not that good, really. I mean, realistically, it's not that. Oh, wait. Construct units produced in this owner city grit +2 ranks. Remember that. Remember that. Construct units produced in this city get +2 ranks. Remember that. Okay. Must be built on an acquired province. Obviously, I don't know why I even read that. Let's read through the abilities. Pinning Barrage. Units in a 2 hex radius suffer 20 physical damage, become marked, and have a 60% chance of being immobilized. Honestly, not that bad. Not that good, because the immobilized chance is kind of low, but immobilized can be quite detrimental to units that need to get into range and not be immobilized. The low chance for it to actually go off, though, especially at higher tier units, we're talking like you could be as low as like a 30% chance to hit an enemy. So it's like super hard to gauge. I don't know. Warding metals is pretty good. All shield units and all constructs do remember that, get warded. They get +3 resistance against magic attacks. Now, later in the game, magic attacks will get more and more and more and more rare, but they will still exist. And importantly, there are some units who do have some flags. For example, Oathsworn's Avenger, their Radiant Slash is actually flagged as a magic attack. So Radiant Slash, for example, would actually proc that magic damage, and they would get more resistance against it. It's not that amazing, because magic damage is kind of weirdly like out of the meta, just because of how battle mages have been treated, I guess is the best way to put it. They've not been treated nicely over this game's history. But it is pretty decent, and I'll get into some other stuff it does later. Destabilized Mana Core. Oh boy. This spell is so bad, it's comical. And it's funny because it's like almost good, but it's just so bad. So enemies in a 2 hex radius are marked, which can be good. Then after 1 turn, it explodes, dealing a catastrophically massive amount of damage. But actually, when you actually pay attention to how much damage it does, you're looking at like 20. After all the resistances and everything. 25, I'll be lenient. Maybe. Here's the problem. Spending your resources trying to trap enemies, trying to keep them in that so they end their turn in there and take damage to get like 20 damage is really not that big a deal. It's really not that big a deal at all. In fact, Destabilized Mana Core has a huge issue where enemies will just stand in it because like who gives a crap? It's not worth what you're trying to get out of it. I guess the problem could be that if it did too much damage, it would be overpowered at killing squishy units. But like the only people who can ever really trap in it are units that are just tanky to begin with. Like you're gonna be trapping melee, you know, because the melee will be in your melee line, and they'll go, oh no, and then they blow up, and they're like, oh, never mind. Tuning kit. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Overcharge ability. Okay, this gives a support unit, and only support units, overcharge. Overcharge is very frustrating to me. Now, the ability overcharge heals 20 hit points and gives overcharge to a construct. Overcharged, this unit has plus 50 damage on attacks. Don't worry, it's not plus 50. I think they meant it to be plus 50%, and they just literally never adjusted the tooltip. Which is odd, but okay. And then it has a 30% chance of stunning itself for 2 turns after completing any attack action. Which is so hilariously stupid, but okay. The hope is you just never proc the self-stun, and if you do, then you just curse that the company randomly gave a low chance debuff to something to make constructs actually playable. Now, I don't know why they did it. You don't know why they did it. But they did it. So that's frustrating. The damage is cool, though. Being able to buff constructs is cool, though. I do like constructs, right? But, like, why? Why the chance of self-stunning? I guess it's thematic, but like no one does this shit. Whatever. And most I see it used on like reaver cannons, I guess. Construct there it goes again. Construct Great Bombard. So it's a siege project, but you make a big cannon for the siege. Get it? Because Constantinople with the Ottomans. Big cannon. Get it? Okay. Sure. I guess. Ironclad. I'm gonna be real with you. I don't think it's really even worth talking about Ironclad because, well, no, it is kind of worth talking about Ironclad. Let's talk about this issue for a second, okay? Ironclad is a very legitimately big issue. That's a Great Bombard. Whee! Okay. The problem with Ironclad is it is a mythic unit. Mythic units almost get buffed by nothing. Its base damage is not very good. Barrage can randomly change where it's hitting in the middle of its triple hit. Barrage has a cooldown. You can only load a shot once a battle, so you get 3 shots. Do you notice a problem here with the Ironclad? I've seen Ironclads used a lot, and never in my life have I ever seen them be effective. They do hilariously low damage for a tier 4 unit. They do not scale into the late game, so even if you use them early in the game, even if you rush them and get them out of that tier 3 tome, and you have to build them, not summon them, even if you get that tier 3 tome and even if you summon them, their damage is going to be sad because they're still doing half physical damage, which is fine, but like this 16 damage 3 times seems like a really big number. I agree, but it's just not, because it's only really good if you load in one of the special ammunition, and even then it tends to get resisted so much, and even then you probably don't notice that at this point at tier 3 you've probably got enough enchantments and stuff on your units that doing this much damage is really not even that amazing anymore. A single direct fire for 40 damage might end up hitting a unit for like 25 to 30. And it doesn't automatically hit. And the barrage has a 50% chance to hit. I forgot about that. Oh my god. Okay. I don't know, dude. The Ironclad just doesn't do nearly enough damage. It's so bad. It's not as bad as the Transmuter. It still does impact the game. It's just like, you have to keep them alive. You have to body block for them. You have to keep them shooting. They have a huge chance to just AoE and kill your own units. It's just really bad. Okay, Tome of the Golden God. This is where we're going to start talking about things that work with Materium. Tome of the Golden God. So, first thing, let's talk about the Gold Golem. Why are we going to talk about the gold? No, you know what? Let's not talk about the Gold Golem. Let's talk about everything else, then we'll go to that one. So, Bazaar of Wonders. It's a mine that gives plus 10 gold, then gives plus 5 gold per unique adjacent province improvement. It gives a lot of gold. You get it? You get infinite gold. You probably, at this point, if you've gotten to Tome of the Golden God, you've probably almost reached the point of infinite gold anyway. But Bazaar of Wonders gives you even more infinite gold. Why? Well, you'll see here real quick. So, you got the Tome of Transmutation, which is giving you 10 buckets of gold a second. Tome of the Golden God gives you one of the better race transformations. In fact, potentially one of the best minor race transformations. Yeah, it's definitely up there. So your entire race gets +2 resistance, which is amazing. And this is a minor race transformation, so this does stack with all the other minor race transformations, and it will be allowed with a major race transformation as well. You get +2 resistance, then everyone in your population generates an additional gold. At this point in the game, I'd wager that's worth about 60 to 70 gold, if I'm just spitballing. Probably about 60, yeah. So that's a good bit of gold just to get for free, and then the +2 resistance, which is already pretty dang good. Then you get luxury markets. This is a building, you put it into your city. The city can now buy now twice a turn, and it's cheaper. That means you can buy 2 units a turn, buy 2 buildings a turn, and for cheaper. This allows you, once you have infinite gold, to slap this into any new city or even your major city and either produce a crap load of high tier units or to just quickly and rapidly get any of your smaller cities up to date. Gilding Blast is also in here. Grants units in a 1 hex radius a 90% chance of becoming gilded. I like how it says that grants them the chance. It benevolently grants them the chance to become gilded. What is gilded? It is a unit that is stunned, and if it dies, the winner of the battle gets 20 gold per unit tier. As you imagined, we're reaching infinite gold levels of silliness. I've literally floated like 9,000 gold because I had nothing to do anymore. So Gilded Blast is okay, I guess. Regent Refinery gives you gold. You never would have thought it. You didn't see it coming, did you? You didn't see more gold coming, did you? Then we get food per magic material in the domain and draft per magic material in the domain. It's a little bit more draft, which can of course be useful, and it gives you food. But the gold in the draft can be okay, it's just not that much. But hey man, once you have infinite gold, just buy it out, right? Like, who cares? Now let's move on to the Gold Golem. This is a unit, it exists, it's good, but it's probably not as good as you were hoping for. So he does a grand total of 26 damage, once. He can only attack once. He does count as a polearm unit though. I think a unit at this size would deal bonus damage no matter what kind of weapon he used, but okay. He does do bonus damage to cavalry and large targets, but only 26 damage. It's pretty bad. His whole advantage here is he has a 60% chance of gilding any enemy hit, and he hits all enemies in a 1 hex cone. So he AoE stuns enemies, which is interesting. His next ability is Strike Gold. Deal damage to all gilded units within a 3 hex radius. So every enemy unit takes 45 damage if they're stunned, or I should say gilded. Then if any are killed, it heals 10, which is... it's certainly an effect. I don't know how good it is, but it's certainly one of them. Now it has really powerful abilities here, okay? Although it doesn't count as a polearm unit, it gets the polearm weapon effects, so it can first strike an enemy. While first striking an enemy, it will cleave in front of it, giving it a chance to stun any enemy who attacks it before they even attack into him. So any unit who attacks a golden golem could potentially get stunned and not even get their attack. Their next effect here is Golden Curse. Anyone who does manage to attack him also gets a chance to be stunned anyway. So they could be stunned for trying to attack him, and they could be stunned for successfully attacking him. Then he gets Golden Retaliation. While he's in defense mode, he has unlimited retaliation attacks. You might not have guessed it, but this makes him really annoying. Because he sits in the front, staying in defense mode, never really doing anything. Infinitely retaliating, chain stunning everyone. Boy, if you don't have flying to get past him, he can be annoying. If you have flying to get past him, he doesn't do anything. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's probably not great balance right there. Flying. But anyway, if you don't have flying, he's really good. Just hope they don't have any of the 19 ways to bring flying in to just run right past him. But if they don't, holy crap, there's almost no way to get past this unit. You will almost never reach the back line against a faction that has this unit unless you have flying. And as we mentioned earlier, although he is tier 5, you can produce him in a building. You can produce him in your capital, and you can just buy 2 of them a turn. That means in 4 turns, you can have 8 of them. That's a lot of gold. Tome of the Crucible has been totally power creep by Tome of Calamity, but let's go through it anyway. we finally get the one singular good spell for doing damage from this entire goddamn affinity. And it is a good one. Lava Burst. All targets in a 2-hex radius suffer 30 fire damage and are immediately lit on fire and are slowed, and the entire ground is lit on fire, putting them into even more burning. Lava Burst is just really actually good. It's like one of the only good damage spells in the game. There's some good ones, but this is like one of the only good ones. It's amazingly effective. It denies so much area. Enemies are slowed, so they're gonna have to walk out of the fire sometimes, and then by the time they walk out, they're out of movement. The fire will actually start taking up the dot damage. Even late game, this can actually be a good bit of dot damage, just because they're gonna be wasting 2 or 3 turns just walking around it. Lava Burst is just really good. If it wasn't for the Tome of Cleansing Flame. Sorry, I had to go back to it and talk about it. Yeah, see, so the Tome of Cleansing Flame makes it so any unit with Zeal or Faithful, which will be your entire army by that point, all fire on the ground becomes Cleansing Flame. And then when you walk on Cleansing Flame, you don't get lit on fire, you get your debuffs removed. So if your enemy go to Tome of Cleansing Flame, they just remove all the debuffs you just put on them from Lava Burst. Wow. Cool design, that Cleansing Flame. At least it has the grand cost of unlocking the tome and not even casting a spell to get that ridiculously powerful effect. Fortified Crucible. This is a city structure. All your battlements get 4 more damage, and any hex they attack gets set on fire. That's a really high damage effect that will make your battlements just, it makes them do a lot more damage, and because they're constantly lighting the ground on fire, they're just really helping Cleansing Flame to purge everything so that they can never be debuffed. Seriously, Cleansing Flame. Can we actually talk about that tome and how useless it's made so many different things? Pyroclastic Eruption. Okay, so this one's actually not really that good. It's okay, but yeah. So you target a province, you blow it up, you do a little bit of damage. Okay, it's better than the physical damage one because at least it's magical damage. But oh wait, it's actually fire damage, which is rapidly becoming the worst damage type in the game, because you know, Pyre Templars get 6 fire resist for free. I will keep mentioning this because it's like actually screwed up the game's balance so hard. The game's balance has actually been screwed so hard because Cleansing Flame exists. Meteor Arrows. Okay, so this got nerfed a while back, and I don't think it really needed it, but okay. It's one of the only good enchantments for range units in the game, so of course it got nerfed. It only gives it to range units, skirmishers, of course not battle mages, of course not support units, because we need to buff every melee unit with 1 enchant, but we only need to buff half of the range units with 1 enchant. It is a problem, and I will keep mentioning it, because like it is really starting to screw with the game's balance, that like certain units just don't really work in the current game anymore. So what it does do is it deals 3 fire damage to the target, and then all adjacent enemies to the target. It used to do 4 fire damage, where you could argue it was overpowered. Sure, some people would agree, some people wouldn't agree. But at 3 damage, it's clearly too little, as seen from Tome of Calamity, giving, you guessed it, 4 damage. So meteors should probably be buffed back to 4. It's still okay, I guess, but I would like to see it buffed back to 4. It's still decent. Yeah. Then all these units get demolishers so they can destroy reinforced obstacles. Unfortunately, I don't think archers really want to destroy reinforced obstacles because they really want as much stuff between them and the enemy. It's meteor arrows is okay, I just don't know if it's like worth building for anymore, and I personally haven't seen anyone build for it. In fact, meteor shower. So there's a combat enchantment. 2 meteors impact next to random enemies when you cast this, as well as the start of your turn for the next 3 turns. Each meteor deals 15 fire damage and 15 physical damage in a 1 hex radius. Sometimes it can be really impactful, and sometimes it can hurt you. Because it can actually AoE into your troops. Overall, it'll hurt them more. It's just... that's the right way to put this. I feel like the problem with Meteor Shower, it costs a lot of mana and a lot of combat casting points to get a spell that it will, I agree, it will do a lot of damage over the course of the fight, but it's not doing any debuffs, it's not doing any effect. And to be honest with you, I don't really see anyone talk about Meteor Shower. I don't think it's worthless. I just think it costs a lot for what it does. And really, that's kind of the problem with the Tome of the Crucible. It gives a lot of good effects, but like a lot of the ones it's giving them aren't really doing that much. Like, so Lava Burst is good, but it gets hard countered by Cleansing Flame. Meteor Arrows is good, but it should probably go back to 4 damage. Fortified Crucible is actually good. If you're not fighting Cleansing Flame, Fortified Crucible can actually make it really tough to get through cities, especially with that 40 fortification. Like, oh my god. Pyroclastic Eruption can be okay, especially for altering terrain, but I mean, like, the Shadow Tome does -5 status resist. Pyroclastic Eruption doesn't do anything. Meteor Shower is okay, but it's a lot of your resources. Then this brings us to Great Foundry. Is Great Foundry good? Not really. It's a mine that gives you 10 gold, and then per adjacent mine you get drafted gold, which could be okay, I guess, if you're just stacking mines. But why would you be stacking mines when you have unlimited gold from the rest of Materium? Its unique effect is you can draft magma spirits. That's right, out of your tier 5 tome, you can draft tier 3 units. Wait. Well, at least it wouldn't be that bad if, like, and I don't know, this is just off the top of my head, just thinking it out loud. There wasn't a tome with a better AoE that also had a better buff for ranged units that also affected all ranged units, that also buffed melee units really hard, that also summoned a battle mage that was a tier 4 battle mage. If only there wasn't a tome that was, I do everything you do but better in not even in a small way. Tome of Calamity is like massively better, in my opinion. Massively better. It's not even a small amount. It's like, oh my god, this is quite a sizable difference in power. Okay, Tome of Severing is actually quite good. Tome of Severing does a couple things, and I'm gonna... Okay, the number one thing we need to do when we talk about Tome of Severing is describe Disrupted. Disrupted turns off unit enchantments. Unit enchantments are really important. Oh, I should mention, by the way, these golden golems you're summoning are gonna have +2 rank if you got the War Foundry. So this is one of those weird situations where you can actually get golden golems that are really, really strong. I should say it's one of those situations where you get mythic units that are really strong because you're summoning them with +2 rank, which, especially if you're summoning them out of your capital, you could potentially just be summoning golden golems at elite rank. And with Scions of Evil, you could actually be summoning them at champion rank. And if you really wanted to go with a funny, and you went the Oathsworn of Strife, you could actually summon them at legend rank, which doesn't even seem right to me, but yes, that could happen. Huh, that's funny. Okay, so Disrupted turns off all unit enchantments, which is good. It's quite a good effect. And that's the main effect of this tome, but it's not the only one. Okay, let's go through an order. We have no building, so we're already weaker off. We have no building. Can we make up for it? Yes, but let me continue. We're at null shield. All shielded units and only shielded units give itself, yeah, I just wanted to double check. It does give itself and adjacent friendly units get 5 status resist. This means each of your shielded units can just basically go, I'm not going to say CC immune, but very, very resistant to debuffs. Let's put it that way. Shielded units, though, aren't really going to get used that much at this tier. You could probably still be sitting on bastions once you get to a tier 4 tome, so it could affect them, but you will want to start moving off to other things. Final Banishment is interesting because there's lots of factions that can chain revive their units. Final Banishment kills every corpse in the entire battlefield. It just obliterates them. Every corpse is destroyed. Think of this like Magic the Gathering, like exile target deck. Sorry, not deck, that'd be a bit strong. Exile target graveyard. That's the best way to put Final Banishment. The entire map, all corpses are gone, destroyed, ripped apart, asundered. You cannot revive them. They are gone from this existence. Then, all friendly units heal 5 and get a bolstered resistance. Now this affects all corpses, even your own. Okay, so you can't really use this if you're trying to revive your own units. But if a lot of people had died, this can be a pretty decent way to get a global heal in, or to just completely shut down someone who's trying to revive their own units. Astral Severance is bad. I just don't see that ever getting used. Conjure's Spell Ward is the strongest aspect of this tome. You can put a spell ward down anywhere at all. It's incredibly strong. It's outrageously strong. You can put it down on any battle and shut down your opponent's ability to cast. Even if your opponent has death magic and could potentially try to get infinite combat casting, when you take twice the amount of combat casting to cast anything, it's going to be a bit rough to cast anything. Conjure Spell Ward is just really, really strong. Then there's Severing Golem, which is also strong. We got a unit that is putting out AoE weakened because it deals damage to the target and then 50% of that damage to adjacent enemies. Now, it does only do 16 damage as a tier 5 unit, so don't look at this unit for damage, but it does AoE weakened, AoE disruption. That's both of these are really powerful effects, and overall it will contribute a decent amount of damage to the battlefield. Then of course, every 2 turns it can use Dispelling Field. Each friendly unit within 2 hexes has one of their negative status effects dispelled, and then each time a negative status effect gets dispelled, this unit gets status protection and strengthened. So of course, with that strengthened, this unit actually will do some decent damage, because it does AoE, only 50% damage, but you're weakening, you're disruptioning, you're helping your allies by removing their debuffs. These are all good things. Then, every 4 turns, you can use Magical Disruption. Up to 5 random enemies suffer 30 frost damage and have a 90% chance of being disrupted. Now you can use that at the start of battles, or you can use that maybe in the middle of the battle. Turning off enchantments by disrupting units is just a really powerful effect. There's going to be so many enchantments stacked on units by the mid game. This will be very impactful. Then of course we have Disrupting Blades, which affects shocks, polearms, fighters, skirmishers. For some reason not shields. I literally don't get that one. I guess shields just aren't using blades or disrupting. So makes base melee attacks of enchanted units gain a 60% chance of inflicting disrupted, which can be quite good. It's a little bit low on the chance, and it doesn't double for non-repeating, or at least it doesn't say it does. So it's a bit low on the chance, but it's pretty good if it does go off. Pretty diabolical turning off enchantments. Yeah. Overall, Tome of Severing, it's mostly the Conjure Spell Ward tome, but Severing Golem is also pretty good. And do remember, Severing Golem. That's right, it's a construct. It builds in a city. You get that +2 recruit rank, and that's pretty good. Tome of the Creator. Now here's our tier 5 tome. Tome of the Creator has that Tectonic Shatter. Now this is probably why it's so frustrating that most of the previous damage effects for Materium are bad, because once you get to Tome of the Creator, there's basically no reason to ever use any of them ever again. Whereas other tomes can have spells that are still good, or casting cost efficient, or have some unique effects or something. Like, once you get to Tectonic Shatter, it's like, why use anything else? I mean, you could argue for Lava Burst, I guess. That's about it. So this spell, this is your tier 5 Gigatome. So how good is Tome of the Creator? All enemy units on the entire map have a 60% chance of being stunned. All obstacles have a 50% chance of being destroyed, and all enemies suffer 30 physical damage. Obviously, you can ignore anything there that isn't all enemies have a 60% chance of being stunned. Even if you only have a half chance, or sorry, even if their status resist reduced it to half, so that you only have a 30% chance, that is still a lot of units that you'll be stunning every turn. There's only so many cleanses you can have. There's only so many units you can have with cleanse in certain positions. Constantly, or at the very least for 2 turns, being able to completely disrupt your enemies and obliterate their chance to respond to the opening plays of a battle. Even if you spend all your combat casting for 2 turns, right, and it's gone, you can't combat cast again, you don't even have death magic to go infinite magic, right? Even if all you do is Tectonic Shatter 2 times in a row, you can disrupt your enemies so hard that you end up winning the battle. Now, of course, it's on your enemy to try to, I don't even know, stay alive long enough that you run out of Tectonic Shatters. Because it is a lot. I mean, 65 combat casting, 200 mana. It'll be hard to cast that a 3rd time. Some people can't even cast it 2 times, right? But overall, it's just a really powerful spell. Which brings us to Titan of Earth, which is kind of also a spell. So Titan of Earth summons the Titan of Earth, which probably should have been buildable by Tome of the Crucible. Tome of the Crucible, instead of building a tier 3 unit as a tier 5 tome, should probably have been able to construct the Earth Titan out of their special building, but I digress. Earth Titan, is he good? Can we trust him? Nah, he's pretty good. So he's got that 30 damage charge strike, which would matter if it did any magical damage, or he wasn't a mythic unit. The reality is that actually probably won't do nearly as much damage as you think. Let's see, he does have Earth and Fury, so if an enemy is immobilized or slowed, he does more damage. That can be okay. His main use is, obviously, you summon him right on the enemy backline, and then you Seismic Slam. And then all enemies within 2 hexes of the Earth Titan have a 90% chance of being immobilized. So what you do is you slam the Earth Titan into the enemy formation, then you Seismic Slam. Then every enemy is now, well, I shouldn't say enemy, a lot of them are now immobilized, ruining their turn. The Earth Titan is still alive, so they probably need to kill him, or at the very least, he could keep units in his zone of control and just be a generally annoying son of a bitch. I don't think he does anything besides that, though, right? Like, that's it. I mean, I'm not saying that's not a lot, but I'm pretty sure I went over him. Yeah, so that's basically it. So the Earth Titan, the question is this as good as Tectonic Shatter? I guess you could make an argument. All adjacent enemies lose their defense mode retaliation, so it could be good in the right situation for like opening up a defensive line for you to crush. But, you know, so does Tectonic Shatter, and they're both out of the same tome at the same time, right? I can see an argument for Titan of the Earth, so I'm not going to call him useless. I guess my only question is, why is he not buildable out of the Tome of the Crucible with the Great Foundry? Seriously. It's annoying. Create Earthshaker engines. It's a siege battle. I mean, I guess you get lots of fortification damage and an engine. Does the engine matter? not really. It's a lot of siege damage, so you can break through a fort very quickly. I guess my only, like, it's a tier 5 tome and you're getting a siege project? Okay, Eternal Earth. This one's pretty decent. All elementals get undying. Every single elemental forever now has a a one-time chance. I was going to say 50-time chance. No, a one-time chance to revive with 50% of their health. I shouldn't say chance. They always revive once with 50% of their health, which is obviously good. The only issue is elementals have kind of been power creeped really hard. So have constructs. So you might be noticing kind of my ending complaint here, right? If constructs have been power creeped and elementals have been power creeped, can we maybe look at like getting them back up to date or making more sense? Because it kind of sucks that so much of this stuff goes to a theme, and then the theme ends up being 90% of the time the theme of buffing constructs and elementals and all that tends to be ignore all of that and just spam nothing but severing golems. Not literally as your only unit, but get severing golems behind your other units and then just shoot stuff with them. And I don't know, it's boring. It's not exactly exciting. Oh well, what are you gonna do? That's just what I want. I just want more diversity. So we're lagging because we're gonna close that. So here's what I would say the tiers are. I tried to be a little bit more aggressive with putting tomes that I think are actually bad at the bottom. I think I was a little bit too lenient previously with just like, well, they're bad, so C tier, but you know what I mean? Yeah. So Alchemy is amazing. Obviously, we went over that. Construct is amazing. We went over that and twice now. It's just really good. Severing is also amazing. Transmutation is amazing. I just talked about them. I hope you're paying attention. This will be on the test. You know, some people said I come off as, oh, what's the right way to put it? Insulting? Maybe you guys just don't get me yet. 90% of my insults are not serious. So Tome of Enchantment is A tier. Honestly, in a certain way, I feel like I think Enchantment is like B tier. It just synergizes with shield builds a lot. I think that's true. Artificing is good because of the crit chance. Actually, I'm gonna put Artificing down as well. I feel like I was actually a bit too lenient with a lot of these tomes. I mean, just because they have a build that's good for them doesn't make them overall good. I think the Creator is good, A tier, solid tome. Just spamming the AoE stun is annoying. It's not as good as Disruption Wave probably, but yeah. Golden Realm is obviously incredible. Just unlimited infinite gold. Okay, yeah, that's pretty good. Creator's good. Discipline, it's I mean, these are the B tier tomes, right? They're all fine. Discipline's fine. Artificing's fine. Wind. Honestly, I think I was too nice to Wind as well. Dreadnought, actually, I'm gonna be real with you. I think Dreadnought goes into A tier, not because it's like on its own, I don't think it's that amazing, but I think it just has crazy synergy with the higher tier construct tomes from giving them their higher tier recruit rank. It just has really good synergy in allowing you to actually make constructs, I'm not going to say like super viable, but at least like a thing. Without Tome of the Dreadnought, they're not a thing. With Tome of the Dreadnought, they recruit at high rank, so at least they're a thing, right? So that leads us to Artificing, Enchantment. I mean, they both, Artificing has builds it's good in, Enchantment has builds they're good in. I just don't think overall they have as much as what other tomes from other factions might offer, right? Shades, I just don't think does much. Winds, I think, is power creeped off the planet and doesn't really even do anything anymore. Honestly, the only reason I even think it's even decent is Zephyr Archer can still sometimes sort of kind of maybe sometimes in the right light, if you squint your eyes, could be good. Terramancy does nothing. Rock does very little. So there's my tomes. So that's about it. You guys could agree or disagree. Honestly, a lot of you guys disagree, but I think overall the most important thing to do isn't to like look at them on a tier list. Instead, the most important thing to do is to look at them as what can make my build work and what can augment me in this situation. Because you might see Artificing in B tier and say, what? But that's really important to this build I'm doing. Sure, and I agree. I just don't think it's like taken as a whole, it doesn't do that much. But if you take it for your build in that specific situation, you know what I mean? You can't force a square peg into a circle, but maybe you could put a triangle in there. I don't even know what that means. Anyway, so I was originally going to play a song at the end of this because a lot of you guys have been subscribing, liking, blah, 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 blah. Lots of, I shouldn't say lots of, but like some ad revenue, more than usual for this channel. So what I was going to do is put a song at the end, just to put a song at the end because I thought to myself, screw it, let me just put a song at the end of the video, right? And then I was going to do power metal. And then I thought to myself, most of the time I do industrial. Like my main musical tastes are like industrial, aggro tech, cyberpunk kind of music. Cyberpunk's a bit more mainstream maybe these days. But I was looking at YouTube to try to like license stuff out because like I bought a song to play. Oh, what was it? It was something of metal. The Brothers of Metal, what are they called? Oh god, I can't remember their names now. I was literally just listening to them. Anyway, so I bought that and then I thought, nah, I'll do like industrial. Like none of you guys are gonna like industrial, but I thought, nah, let me do industrial because it'll be funny to play something you guys hate. And then literally, okay, so the problem with industrial music as a whole is if any of them ever do anything even slightly in the tiniest way to benefit their careers, everyone calls them sellouts. So I kid you not a single one of them work with YouTube so that I could license them so that I don't get demonetized for playing their song. Not even one of them. I'm not even joking. Not one. Not KMFDM, not Combi Christ, not Foz Gore, whatever his name is. Not any of them. None of them. I was amazed. So, okay. Yeah, so then you can look at the tier list here. Here's my song. You can listen to my great music while I look at my tier list.
I'd like to think we have some form of control still. Making our
That's it. That's my gift to you guys.
And voicing our equally shallow opinions.
Remember, the cringier industrial is, the better. Because it's like a post. What's the right way to put it? It's like a post irony music, right? There have not been new industrial bands for a decade. Haven't helped. The genre died.
Autonomy is an illusion.